We've been taught to believe that love is patient, that understanding means accepting all behaviors, that giving someone the benefit of the doubt is always the noble path. Society whispers that questioning someone's intentions makes us paranoid, that seeing manipulation where others see charm reveals our own insecurities. We're conditioned to suppress that primal instinct, that ancient alarm bell that rings when something feels fundamentally wrong. Yet what if this very conditioning serves as the perfect hunting ground for those who understand the architecture of human vulnerability? What if the most dangerous predators are not the obvious ones, but those who speak the language of empathy whilst wielding it as a weapon? Carl Jung understood that beneath the veneer of civilized interaction lies a complex web of unconscious motivations and shadow projections. He recognized that the most sophisticated manipulators are not crude in their approach. They are artists of psychological exploitation, painting themselves as saviors whilst systematically dismantling their target's sense of reality. These individuals possess an uncanny ability to identify and exploit the deepest wounds of the human psyche, presenting themselves as the balm for pain they themselves inflict. They understand that the most effective manipulation occurs not through force, but through the careful cultivation of dependency and self-doubt. The manipulative mind operates like a master locksmith, possessing keys to doors you never knew existed within your psychological fortress. They study you with the intensity of a scientist, cataloging your fears, your hopes, your insecurities, and your dreams. Every piece of information you share becomes ammunition in their arsenal. Every vulnerability, a potential entry point for their influence. They understand that true control comes not from dominating your actions, but from colonizing your thoughts, making you question your own perception of reality until you become dependent upon their version of truth. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, but he also understood that some individuals weaponize this concept, creating elaborate false selves designed specifically to ensnare others. These psychological predators craft personas so compelling, so perfectly tailored to your needs and desires, that you mistake their performance for genuine connection. They become mirrors reflecting back exactly what you wish to see, whilst hiding their true nature behind layers of calculated charm and manufactured empathy. The tragedy lies not just in the manipulation itself, but in how it corrupts the very foundations of trust and authentic connection. When someone masters the art of psychological manipulation, they don't simply deceive you, they teach you to deceive yourself. They create a reality where up becomes down, where your instincts become enemies, where your natural protective mechanisms are reframed as character flaws. This is the true horror of encountering a manipulative mind. It doesn't just threaten your external circumstances, it threatens the very core of who you are. The manipulative archetype that Jung would recognize operates through a specific linguistic signature, a verbal fingerprint that reveals the underlying psychological machinery at work. Unlike the crude attempts of amateur manipulators who rely on obvious tactics, the sophisticated predator employs language that appears enlightened, compassionate, and deeply understanding. They speak in the vocabulary of healing whilst inflicting wounds, use the grammar of growth whilst stunting development, and employ the syntax of love whilst practicing emotional vampirism. Their words carry a peculiar quality that feels simultaneously profound and hollow, like beautiful music played on broken instruments. Jung understood that language is not merely communication, but a vehicle for consciousness itself, and the manipulator intuitively grasps this principle. They understand that by controlling the narrative, they control reality. They become masters of reframing, taking your legitimate concerns and translating them into evidence of your own dysfunction. When you express hurt, they transform it into proof of your oversensitivity. When you seek clarity, they present your need for understanding as evidence of your inability to trust. This linguistic alchemy turns your strengths into weaknesses and your wisdom into ignorance. The shadow aspect of the manipulative personality reveals itself through what Jung termed projection, but in reverse. Rather than projecting their own darkness onto others, they project an idealized light. a false brilliance designed to blind you to their true nature. They present themselves as uniquely enlightened, as possessing insights that others lack, as being capable of love in ways that previous partners could never achieve. This grandiose self-presentation serves a dual purpose. It elevates them to guru status, whilst simultaneously diminishing everyone else in your life, creating a psychological hierarchy where they reign supreme. Carl Jung would recognize in the manipulator's speech patterns a distorted echo of therapeutic language, a corruption of the very tools meant to heal. They speak of boundaries whilst violating yours, discuss emotional intelligence whilst displaying none, and reference personal growth whilst actively sabotaging your development. They understand that the most effective lies contain elements of truth, and they weave their deceptions using threads borrowed from legitimate psychological concepts. This sophisticated camouflage makes their manipulation particularly insidious, as it masquerades as wisdom whilst serving destruction. The archetypal manipulator possesses an almost supernatural ability to identify your core wounds and present themselves as uniquely qualified to heal them. If you struggle with feelings of abandonment, they become the most devoted partner imaginable. At first, if you battle with self-worth, they shower you with praise and validation. Initially, they study your emotional landscape like a cartographer mapping territory to conquer, identifying not just your vulnerabilities, but the specific keys to unlock your defenses. This targeted approach makes their manipulation feel less like an attack and more like a homecoming, which is precisely what makes it so dangerous. When the manipulative mind reveals itself through speech, it does so with phrases that sound reasonable on the surface, but carry undertones of control and invalidation. The most dangerous words are often disguised as care. "I'm only saying this because I love you, but everyone else thinks you're..." This construction appears loving whilst delivering poison, creating a double bind where rejecting the criticism seems like rejecting love itself. Jung would recognize this as a shadow projection disguised as compassion, where the manipulator's own judgmental nature is presented as coming from external sources, whilst they position themselves as your protector against this supposed criticism. Another particularly insidious phrase pattern reveals itself in statements like, "You're too sensitive. That's not what I meant." This linguistic manipulation serves multiple functions simultaneously. It invalidates your emotional response, denies their responsibility for their words, and positions you as the problem. Carl Jung understood that gaslighting, though he wouldn't have used this modern term, represents a fundamental attack on the psyche's ability to trust its own perceptions. When someone consistently tells you that your reality is wrong, they're not just disagreeing with your interpretation. They're attempting to colonize your consciousness itself. The phrase, "No one will ever love you like I do," reveals the manipulator's strategy of manufactured scarcity, creating artificial competition where none should exist. This statement masquerades as romantic devotion whilst actually serving as a threat and a limitation. Jung would recognize this as an attempt to become the sole source of validation and love in your life, creating a psychological monopoly that serves their control. They're not declaring their unique love. They're declaring their intention to ensure no other love can flourish in your life. Perhaps most revealing are the conditional statements that sound like promises but function as threats. "If you really loved me, you would." Or, "Someone who truly cared wouldn't." These constructions weaponize your own love and commitment against you, creating impossible standards where proving your love requires diminishing yourself. Jung understood that authentic love seeks to expand both individuals, not diminish one for the elevation of another. When love becomes a currency used to purchase compliance, it ceases to be love and becomes a tool of psychological bondage. The manipulator's language reveals their fundamental misunderstanding of human connection, viewing relationships not as partnerships, but as competitions to be won. They speak of trust whilst monitoring your every move, discuss communication while shutting down conversations that threaten their control, and reference partnership whilst making unilateral decisions about your shared life. Their words create a parallel universe where concepts lose their meaning and become tools for confusion, rather than connection. Jung would recognize this linguistic chaos as a deliberate attempt to keep you off balance, unable to find solid ground upon which to stand and assert your own truth. The individual caught in the web of a manipulative relationship faces a particularly cruel form of psychological imprisonment. The bars of their cage are made of their own caring nature. Your very capacity for empathy becomes the mechanism of your entrapment, as the manipulator expertly plays upon your desire to understand, to forgive, to see the best in others. Jung recognized that our greatest strengths, when weaponized against us, become our most devastating vulnerabilities. The person who loves deeply, who seeks to understand complex human nature, who believes in the possibility of growth and change, becomes the perfect target for someone who understands these qualities not as virtues to honor, but as weaknesses to exploit. The confusion that arises from manipulative encounters strikes at the very core of psychological security. You find yourself questioning not just the manipulator's words and actions, but your own perceptions, memories, and emotional responses. Carl Jung understood that this attack on the foundation of personal reality creates what we might call psychological vertigo, a disorientation so profound that you lose your ability to trust your own inner compass. The manipulator's greatest achievement is not making you believe their lies, but making you doubt your own truths. This internal chaos serves their purposes perfectly, as a confused person is far easier to control than one who trusts their own perceptions. The social dimension of this struggle adds another layer of complexity and pain. Friends and family members, operating from their own unhealed wounds and unconscious patterns, may inadvertently support the manipulator's narrative. They see the charming public persona, the carefully crafted image of reasonableness and care, and cannot fathom the private reality of psychological abuse. Jung would recognize this as a collective shadow projection, where society's discomfort with acknowledging the existence of such sophisticated evil leads to denial and victim blaming. The target of manipulation finds themselves not only fighting for their sanity within the relationship, but also for their credibility within their social circle. The physiological impact of psychological manipulation manifests as a constant state of hypervigilance, where your nervous system remains perpetually activated in response to threats it cannot clearly identify. Your body knows something is wrong long before your mind can articulate the problem. Sleep becomes elusive, appetite fluctuates wildly, and a persistent anxiety settles into your bones like cold fog. Jung understood the intimate connection between psychological and physical health, recognizing that attacks on the psyche inevitably manifest as symptoms in the body. This somatic response is not weakness. It is your organism's desperate attempt to alert you to danger your conscious mind has been trained to ignore. The most heartbreaking aspect of this experience lies in the gradual erosion of your connection to your own authentic self. The manipulator's constant reframing of your reality slowly but surely separates you from your own inner wisdom, your natural instincts, your core values and beliefs. You begin to see yourself through their eyes, to judge your worth by their standards, to seek their approval for thoughts and feelings that should be inherently your own. Jung would recognize this as a form of psychological possession, where another person's unconscious patterns begin to colonize your psyche, leaving you feeling like a stranger in your own life. The tragedy is not just what they take from you, but what they teach you to take from yourself. The journey towards recognizing manipulative patterns requires what Jung termed shadow work, the courageous act of acknowledging the aspects of human nature we would prefer to deny. To understand manipulation, we must first accept that such profound darkness exists within the human spectrum, that some individuals operate from a fundamentally different psychological structure than the majority. This recognition challenges our basic assumptions about human nature, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that not everyone shares our capacity for genuine empathy or our desire for authentic connection. The manipulator represents what Jung called the shadow of the collective, embodying the disowned aspects of human potential that healthy individuals integrate rather than enact upon others. Understanding the manipulative archetype requires recognizing that their behavior stems not from momentary weakness or circumstantial stress, but from a fundamentally different way of experiencing reality. Carl Jung would identify this as a distortion of the individuation process, where instead of developing authentic selfhood, the manipulator creates an elaborate false self designed to extract resources, emotional, psychological, financial, or spiritual, from others. They have learned to survive by consuming the life force of those around them, becoming psychological vampires who cannot generate their own sense of worth or meaning. This understanding breeds not sympathy that excuses their behavior, but clarity that protects you from their influence. The recognition process often feels like awakening from a dream, but not the pleasant kind of awakening where you're relieved to discover the nightmare wasn't real. Instead, you awaken to discover that the beautiful dream was the illusion, and the nightmare is your actual reality. Jung understood this as a crucial but painful stage in psychological development, where the ego must surrender its comfortable illusions in service of deeper truth. The person you thought you knew, the relationship you believed you had, the future you thought you were building, all reveal themselves as carefully constructed mirages designed to keep you walking towards your own destruction. This awakening brings with it a profound grief that Jung would recognize as necessary but devastating. You mourn not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of your innocence, your ability to trust easily, your belief in the fundamental goodness of human nature. You grieve the time lost, the energy wasted, the parts of yourself you abandoned in service of someone who saw your devotion as weakness to exploit, rather than gift to cherish. This grief is sacred work, Jung would argue, as it marks the death of naivety and the birth of wisdom, the end of unconscious participation in your own destruction. Yet within this recognition lies the seed of your liberation. Once you truly see the manipulative pattern for what it is, not love struggling to express itself, not pain seeking healing, but predation seeking prey, you begin to reclaim your power. Jung understood that consciousness is itself transformative. Simply seeing clearly begins the process of breaking free. The manipulator's greatest weapon was your unconsciousness, your willingness to explain away red flags, to excuse unacceptable behavior, to participate in your own confusion. When that weapon is removed through clear seeing, their entire strategy crumbles, revealing them to be far less powerful than they appeared when operating in shadow. The process of breaking free from manipulative influence represents what Jung called psychological alchemy, the transformation of base psychological material into gold. The confusion, pain, and self-doubt that the manipulator instilled within you become the raw materials for forging an unshakable sense of self. Every lie they told you about your worth becomes fuel for discovering your true value. Every attempt they made to diminish your light becomes motivation to shine more brightly. Every boundary they crossed becomes wisdom about where to place stronger barriers in the future. Jung understood that our greatest wounds, when consciously worked with, become the source of our greatest wisdom and strength. This transformation requires what Jung termed holding the tension of the opposites, maintaining awareness of both your vulnerability to manipulation and your inherent strength and wisdom. You must acknowledge that your caring nature made you susceptible to exploitation, whilst simultaneously recognizing that this very capacity for care is also your greatest gift to the world. The manipulator tried to convince you that your empathy was weakness, but Jung would recognize it as evidence of your psychological sophistication and emotional intelligence. The task is not to become cold or cynical, but to develop what might be called wise compassion, the ability to care deeply whilst maintaining clear boundaries. The emergence of authentic personal power following manipulative abuse represents one of the most profound psychological transformations possible. You discover that you no longer need external validation to know your worth, no longer require someone else's approval to trust your perceptions, no longer seek permission to live according to your values. Carl Jung would recognize this as true individuation, the development of a self that is both connected to others and fundamentally self-contained. You become what Jung termed a whole person, someone whose sense of identity and worth emanates from within, rather than depending upon external sources. This internal revolution manifests in your relationships with others as well. You develop an almost supernatural ability to detect manipulative patterns, not through paranoia, but through the refined sensitivity that comes from having survived psychological predation. Your boundaries become clearer, your communication more direct, your tolerance for manipulation non-existent. Jung would recognize this as the development of psychological antibodies. Once your system has been exposed to manipulation and recovered, it becomes far more resistant to future attacks. You retain your capacity for love and connection, whilst developing an inner fortress that cannot be breached by those who would use your caring nature against you. The final stage of this transformation involves what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold space for the full spectrum of human experience without being destroyed by its darker aspects. You develop compassion for the manipulator's wounded origins whilst maintaining absolute clarity about the necessity of protecting yourself from their behavior. You can acknowledge their humanity whilst refusing to become their victim. You understand that forgiveness does not require reconciliation, that love does not mandate self-sacrifice, that empathy can coexist with firm boundaries. This integration represents psychological maturity of the highest order, the ability to love wisely rather than blindly. The liberated individual who has emerged from the crucible of manipulative abuse possesses a quality that Jung would recognize as dangerous to predatory systems. They cannot be fooled twice. Their hard-won wisdom creates a protective field around them, an energetic signature that repels those who seek easy targets and attracts those capable of genuine connection. They have learned to distinguish between love that seeks to elevate and control that masquerades as care, between support that empowers and help that creates dependency, between connection that honors individual sovereignty and enmeshment that dissolves healthy boundaries. This discernment becomes their superpower, their gift to a world full of people still unconsciously seeking their own destruction. Do you recognize yourself in this journey from confusion to clarity, from dependency to sovereignty? Can you feel the stirring of your own inner wisdom, the part of you that has always known when something was wrong but was taught to ignore its voice? Your intuition is not your enemy. It is your most faithful friend, your most reliable guide through the labyrinth of human psychology. Every time you feel that familiar unease in someone's presence, every time their words don't match their actions, every time you find yourself making excuses for someone else's behavior, these are not signs of your oversensitivity, but evidence of your psychological sophistication. The transformed individual becomes a beacon for others still trapped in manipulative dynamics, though they must be careful not to take on the role of rescuer. Jung understood that each person must walk their own path to freedom. Your healing becomes a form of service, but not through preaching or teaching, rather through embodying the possibility that liberation is real, that authenticity is achievable, that love without manipulation exists. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, someone still caught in the web of confusion and self-doubt that you have learned to transcend. Your journey through the darkness of manipulation and into the light of self-knowledge represents one of the most heroic paths a human being can walk. Jung would recognize your story as an archetypal journey, the descent into hell and the return with wisdom that benefits not just yourself, but all those whose lives you touch. You have faced the shadow aspects of human nature and emerged not bitter but wise, not closed but boundaried, not cynical but discerning. You have discovered that your greatest strength lies not in your ability to endure abuse, but in your courage to refuse it. Subscribe to this channel if these words resonate with the truth you've discovered within yourself, and know that in doing so, you join a community of individuals who have chosen consciousness over comfort, truth over convenient illusion, authentic connection over manipulative entanglement. You are not alone in this journey. You are part of an awakening that Jung himself prophesied, a collective recognition that we no longer need to participate in our own psychological destruction. You are not healing. You are already healed. You are not becoming whole. You are remembering your inherent wholeness. You are not learning to trust yourself. You are returning to the wisdom you never truly lost. You are not alone. You are awakening.